Family Time 160, and we're talking about biases. We're continuing to look at social awareness for our SEL competency, and it's important to recognize our biases. We talked last week about empathy, about trying to see things from other people's perspective. And biases are things that often get in the way of us having a clear view of maybe what someone else is thinking or what they're dealing with. Biases get in the way of us seeing who someone truly is. And we're all impacted by biases in one way or another. We often think of biases as implicit prejudices. And that's often what biases are. There's something that's sort of subconscious. We don't even know why we feel a certain way about things. And with real implicit prejudices, we often think of the isms, the racism, sexism, ageism, those negative isms. And those are certainly examples of implicit prejudices, of those subconscious things that often don't make sense. We don't really know why we feel that way. It's typically something that has to do with our environment, the way that we were brought up. But that's something that's important to recognize. There are other types of biases as well. One that I think affects us often is in-group favoritism, where we are more likely to attribute positive things to a group that we consider ourselves a part of. That could be a political party, a social group, a group of friends, a team, a school, where we'll often say, okay, I'm part of this group, so this is the right way to do things. And this other group, they're doing things wrong. Well, they may do things differently, and we have a bias against that difference. And again, sometimes those things are pretty innocent. I'm certainly guilty of in-group biases. Certainly if I'm talking about our school and our teams, I think we have the greatest school in the world and the greatest students. That's a bias. I'm biased against other schools to a point because I think the way that we do things is the right way, or we try to do it the best way. Not that we can always be better. We're always trying to get better, but I'm biased towards the way that we do things, to the culture that we have and that we continue to try to build. I'm biased towards all of my students compared to other students. All in all, that's not a terrible thing, but I do have to recognize that it is a bias. It's biased because this is where I went to school. This is where I teach and coach. This is where my kids go to school. I am biased. There are other biases too, things like over-claiming credit. That's something we do, or maybe we attribute too many of our successes to our own abilities instead of circumstances or support from others. And then we maybe transfer too much blame to outside things instead of putting the blame on ourselves. That's a bias. One we don't think about a lot, but we do it sometimes. We think of, if the situation would have been different. If this person hadn't done this thing, I would have been more successful. That's a bias. And there's conflicts of interest, where maybe our personal agendas get in the way of making a decision that might better benefit the group, or that might benefit us more long term. That's a certain type of conflict of interest. All different types of biases. We're all impacted by them. It's the way it is. So we can either recognize that we are impacted by certain biases And then we can look at those things a little more objectively and try to recognize when biases are impacting our ability to learn, our ability to connect with and communicate with others. And that's another thing we see that all the time. Again, I go back to like political parties, just because I largely think that a lot of the things that we see in politics are pretty disgusting. It's people taking different sides instead of discussing a variety of ideas from different viewpoints and trying to meet in the middle to do the greatest good for the greatest number of people. It's people bickering. It's people being petty and fighting and claiming that one way is the exact right way to do things. And I think that's silly and it's short-sighted. And it has a lot to do with biases and belief systems that people hold only because those are the belief systems that have been presented to them. Those are the belief systems they were brought up in. And I'm not saying people need to change their belief systems, but I think people should ask questions and examine other viewpoints openly and honestly and recognize their own biases. And if we do that, maybe we change some of our views and maybe we solidify some of our views because we've actually given an honest examination of other viewpoints. And if we're going to do that, we have to recognize that we have some biases, that we are biased to particular groups or particular schools of thought. So I want you to consider a bias that you might have. And I want you to think about how that particular bias might impact the way that you think about things and the way that you communicate with others. And that's it. We're not trying to say that anybody's right or wrong. What are some biases you might have? How does that impact the way that you think and behave and interact with others? Until next time, much love.